Hello and welcome to this month's episode of the Legal Update. Today we're going to talk about a couple of things. Seller disclosures, when and when not to disclose. A couple of forms, the NHD report, as well as the environmental hazard booklet. And then lastly, the ever-present trust funds. So let's get into the seller disclosures. A lot of times we have questions about what should a seller disclose and not disclose. Overall, the seller should disclose everything. That's the whole idea of the disclosures. There are a few caveats to that though, so we'll go over those here momentarily. All right, first situation. A seller comes to you and says, hey, I've got this issue in the backyard. Is this really something that I should disclose? What should that do to us as real estate agents? That's right, big red flag, folks. If the seller ever asks about a possible disclosure and whether or not to mention or not, chances are the answer is yes in a big way. It's probably something they're worried about affecting the sale or the marketability of their property, but in the end, it can be a liability for you and the seller. So yes, material facts need to be disclosed always. The next situation is in regards to reports. Sometimes sellers will have reports, maybe they had the roof inspected recently, maybe the foundation, or one of these types of things, and they'll say, do I need to pass these on to the buyer? Again, what does this do to us? Our antenna go up, we got reports, red flag, yes, tell me more please. And so we want to get those reports from the seller and make sure they get to the buyer. It's very important that anything that's outstanding, the buyer be aware of, regardless as to whether that's something that we think may affect the marketability or the sale of the house. Better to deal with that up front than to have liability and potential lawsuit down the road. In regards to those disclosures, a lot of sellers will ask, well, we had that buyer and the transaction didn't work out, but we have that buyer's inspection report left over. Do we need to forward that to the next buyer? The answer is absolutely yes. God forbid there's something on there that a buyer becomes aware of after the fact, after they successfully purchased the home, and then they come back at the seller. And of course, when the seller's in trouble, the listing agent is as well. So make sure you pass those reports on. Lastly is the topic of group homes. So when we say group homes, we're talking about nursing homes in a residential environment, rehab homes in a residential environment, maybe a home for the disabled in a residential environment. The question becomes, is this something that I need to disclose to potential buyers? Surprisingly, the answer to that question is no. You cannot disclose the existence of group homes in a neighborhood. However, if a buyer comes to you as a listing agent or to the seller and asks, are there any group homes in the neighborhood? Then that triggers the disclosure. So we don't want to lie about the existence of a group home in a neighborhood, but it has been deemed not to be a material fact and not something that should be volunteered to a buyer, but should be mentioned if that is asked directly. And lastly, in regards to group homes, if you're not disclosing the fact of a group home, if that home is creating nuisances, just like any other home in a neighborhood could, maybe parking issues or maybe noise issues, these are definitely things that should be disclosed. And through that disclosure, there may be questions asked that reveal that it is a group home, but you don't want to reveal that it's a group home right away. You just want to let them know that they're problematic homes. So keep that in mind. All right, on to contracts. Natural hazard disclosure. This is the third-party report that sellers should buy in every transaction. It covers floods, it covers fire areas, covers taxes such as Melrose and Bond Act of 1915. These are disclosures that absolutely have to be made to a buyer. And if your seller for some reason is indignant and doesn't want to spend the $100 or so in getting this report, I'm going to recommend to you now that you as a listing agent buy it and provide it to the buyer. Because when you provide the NHD to a buyer, it shifts the liability from both the seller and the listing agent over to the third-party company. So it's utterly important. And this is one of the few issues or situations where a listing agent is lumped in with the seller for liability. So it is in your best interest to make sure you have one of these in every transaction. Next is the environmental hazards booklet. This is your get out of jail free card. You provide the booklet, we all know it, and have it signed, the receipt signed by the buyer, acknowledging that we received it. Covers environmental hazards of the house, such as mold, earthquake issues, and whatnot. And this is one where if a home closes and then a buyer comes back and says, well, wait a minute, I didn't understand about this particular environmental hazard, you have that receipt for the booklet, and it really limits your liability and any problems down the road. So the NHD report, natural environmental hazards booklet, got to have these in your transactions. In addition, with all of your disclosures in a transaction, as a listing agent, well as a buyer's agent as well, when those come back from the seller, you're not just transferring those to the buyer and the buyer's agents, you should be reviewing those. Make sure that you don't see anything on there that's obviously incorrect. Make sure it aligns with what your understanding of the property is, and if there's anything on there the seller discloses that you weren't aware of that may need clarification, make sure you get that before you send them off. So we're not just transporting from one party to another, but it's our duty to take a look at these and make sure that they're in good order. So keep that in mind as well. Lastly, trust funds. Seems like we're always talking about trust funds. So if you're collecting pounds, shekels, clams, money orders, cashier's checks, whatever it may be, these are trust funds and they need to be handled as such. So make sure whenever you're in possession of any of these in a lease or a sale transaction that you're recording them in the trust fund log. I know today so much is done with electronic transfers that sometimes it slips our minds, but boy, you've got any of these items, and whether they're actual dollars, pounds, whatnot, or if they're a draft of a sort, such as a cashier's check, those are all trust funds and they need to be handled as such. So, thank you for watching this episode of Legal Update. We'll look forward to seeing you next month.